I'm a airline captain on a wide-body airplane, and I'm going to tell you a brief story about how me and my crew, we went one night in bad weather through the eye of the needle. We survived by the skin of our teeth and thanks to very good training by the company I used to work for then. I think it was in October, and in Nairobi in Kenya, where we used to fly cargo out of, that is in the period of the short rains. The long rains, and then it rains all day, and then in the fall you have the period of the short rains, and the short rains are just that. Out of nowhere it starts to pour, and it pours like you would not believe. It's amazing. And then just like that it's gone again. So we taxi out with this MD-11 with my co-pilot, and there was a ground engineer traveling with us back to Amsterdam who was sitting behind us. And we were taxiing out to the runway behind a 747 of a British company. And it was drizzling, it was dark, and the lighting, this African airport is not too good. But anyway, we taxied to the runway, we saw the 747 taking off and climbing into the night sky, disappearing into the clouds, and a few minutes later we were cleared for takeoff. We heard the pilot in the 747 sign off with the tower and transfer on the radio to the departure air traffic control, and we started our takeoff roll. I had the radar turned on, 5 degrees nose up, so it's scanning the sky in front of you, above you, for weather, and there was nothing but a little bit clutter of green returns that signifies that there's just light rain. So we were picking up speed. This runway only has quite feeble lights at the runway edge, left and right, so not very strong like on other major airports. We were picking up speed, and somewhere, I think it was around 90 or 100 knots, out of nowhere the sky fell on us. It started to pour rain, so amazing that I couldn't see a hand in front of my face. We had the screen wipers on full, and I still couldn't see in front of me. There were no lights on the center line like on some other airports. So I was basically scanning out of my eyes left and right if we had the same distance from the left and the right lights on the edge of the runway. It was racing through my mind, can I abort the takeoff for this, because we have a certain set of rules for which you abort a takeoff, and it was not really a valid reason. And I was so focused on steering that I was so focused on steering the airplane that I did not actually consider the ramifications of this huge downpour. And the airplane accelerated, and at the moment where we were supposed to lift off, the co-pilot calls V rotate, and you pull the yoke towards you and the nose lifts off. And at that moment we got a warning, red flashing lights on our flight displays in front of us screaming, tailwind shear, tailwind shear, tailwind shear. And you just, it's like, some icy hand grips you. And we lifted up the nose, and in the same time I did the standard reflex, raised the gear, which according to protocol you shouldn't do in a case like that, but we did it anyway. We were full power, blasting off, and we started flying, and I was watching the altimeter. We were off the ground, and the gear was cycling up, and the altimeter read field elevation. It was something like 5,380 feet or something like that. And I was watching on the navigation display that the wind vane basically had turned around from 3 knots on the nose to, it was more than 20 knots on the tail. Now, that's what you don't want. You don't want to be, because it basically pushes you back into the ground. And that moment, when I gathered all that data, I focused on the flight directors, the magenta lines on your flight display that tells you how to travel the ideal path through that windshear, out of that windshear. These things are absolute lifesavers. And I flew with my fingerspitzen, with my fingertip. I flew that airplane. And I had it nailed to that pitch bar that guided me almost with the nose as high as a stall almost, to make sure that we did not descend again and hit the terrain. And that was for me as a young captain a litmus test. I was cool as a cat. I went straight into the mode that we practiced in the simulator so often, in the training mode. And I was just sitting there like glued to those magenta bars on the flight display, and it was like I was looking through a straw, and it was like time froze. It went by in a very slow state. And it felt like it was eternity that this thing was blaring at us. Tailwind shear, tailwind shear, tailwind shear. And the nose was up so high, maybe 22, 23 degrees. And the airplane was clawing at the air, and it was not climbing. It was just floating through the air at field elevation, basically. The gear was up, and it did not climb at all. And I just kept watching those two magenta bars, and then finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the wind turned around and we turned us again on the nose, and the airplane slowly started to climb. We climbed out to 10,000 feet, which is about 5,000 feet above field elevation. Made our standard left turn towards the north, towards a beacon called Nakuru. And we cleaned up the airplane, which means we withdrew, we retracted the flaps and the slats. And we did the after takeoff checklist. And then the stressors came in. There's something happening in your brain on the blood-brain barrier, where if you want to survive, you go into the survival mode, and those panic impulses are basically refused by your body. That goes into almost something like a core state to survive, to get out, which was for me a test because I didn't know how I would react. But we did our after takeoff checklist, and then it's like your brain is released again from that survival state. It knows, okay, pulled it through. My heart started beating like you wouldn't believe. It was just pounding out of my chest, and I looked at my co-pilot in the darkness, and he was dead quiet and pale. And we knew we went through the eye of the needle there. It was absolutely nothing short of amazing, and it was all thanks to that amazing training that we received in the airline that I was working at that time. And I asked my co-pilot, and he said, you know what I noticed? He said, we have an altimeter that sits between the main gears and bounces back radio signals off of the ground. And he said we were on that altimeter 15 feet off the ground. Now, remember, this is halfway down the fuselage of an airplane, halfway down the length of that 55-meter long body. The nose is way up, 22 degrees, and the tail is way down. So if you figure that we flew on that radio altimeter altitude of about 15 feet, the tail during that emergency must not have been more than 1 or 2 meters off the ground. We were flying in darkness beyond the runway, across the prairie, outside Nairobi Airport, with our tail only maybe 3 to 6 feet off the ground. It was, when you think of that just, yeah, we went through the eye of the needle that night, and training saved the day. It's amazing, isn't it?